I'm going to talk to you guys about the new Disney Pixar movie Soul and the spiritual elements that are behind the movie. As you can see, I had, well, she's going into her pouch, Gypsy and, or I'm sorry, this is Galaxy, Miss Little Galaxy and Miss Gypsy that are helping me out today, but they're going into their pouch to go back to sleep. So I'm going to start off by giving you guys a quick summary of the movie. So yes, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, make sure that you watch the movie before you watch this video. Once I give you guys a quick rundown of the movie, then I'm going to go into the spiritual elements of it. Because, you know, we all could use a little refresher even after we see a movie. And we already know what happens, am I right? So, the movie Soul is about a middle-aged man named Joe Gardner. He's a school band teacher, but he has dreams of a bigger and better career. And he hears of an opportunity with a legendary band with Dorothea Williams. I don't think that they ever said what the name of the band was, but he was super excited once he eventually gets a gig to play with her and her band, except he ends up falling down a manhole and ends up dying for that. At least up until then. You know, stuff comes after that. But he ends up dying. And one of the quotes that he says towards the beginning of the movie is that he'll be able to die a happy man after he plays with her. When Joe dies, remember, he goes to a place called the Great Beyond. And I love how they illustrated both of this Great Before and the Great Beyond. I love that section of the movie, the way that they illustrated everything. I just love it. So when Joe gets to the Great Beyond, he's resistant to dying, and he ends up in a place called the Great Before. In this Great Before, there's these counselors named Jerry there, and there's all these little unborn souls, and this is the place where they prepare to live. So the goal of each soul in this Great Before is to complete this badge that's on their little chest. And each soul gets assigned a mentor to help them complete their badge. In order to complete the badge, they have to find their spark. Once this badge is completed, it turns into an Earth pass, and they get to go to Earth and live a life on Earth. When Joe gets there, he gets mistaken for one of these mentors. These mentors are other souls that have actually lived on Earth that help the unborn souls find their spark. So Joe gets mistaken for one of these mentors, and he gets assigned a very cynical soul named 22 who is extremely hesitant to going to Earth. She went through so many different mentors, and she had Abe Lincoln, she had Carl Jung, or is it Carl Jung? Carl Jung? I always pronounce it Carl Jung. And even Mother Teresa. So Joe's taken her into this little place where they have like everything. I forget what the name of it was, but he's helping 22 find her spark because they both come to an agreement that Joe will help 22 find her spark, and when her badge turns into an Earth pass, 22 will give it to Joe, so Joe gets what he wants, and he gets to go back down to Earth. And 22 gets what she wants, and she gets to stay right where she's at. They try and try and try, but they fail to find her spark. And after they fail to find her spark, they go into this place called the Zone. This is an area where people go to when they're in some sort of trance while they're doing things that they love. One of the big things that they, I guess, kind of make known is people that play music, but just anything that somebody loves. This is the place that they go to when they're kind of in it, you know what I mean? Also in the zone is lost souls. People who have lost their soul. They're portrayed as these dark and monster-like beings. And in one of the parts of this scene where they're in the zone, they end up saving one of these souls that's a lost soul, and he ends up being like an investment banker or something like that, and he shoves everything off of his desk and he says, "I'm alive!" So he finds his soul. So just to give you guys an idea of what they mean by lost soul in this movie. So they end up meeting this hippie like guy named Moonwind. He's an alive person, and he's got his little group. Everybody's alive, and Moonwind helps them create a portal for Joe to get back into his body. And Joe and 22 both end up going through this portal and end up on Earth. But here's the kicker. This effort, though, also fails because when Joe and 22 end up going to Earth, 22 finds herself in Joe's body, and Joe finds himself in a cat. And 22, when she initially reaches Earth, she's scared, and, she doesn't like it. She's very resistant, but she eventually ends up finding joy in the simple things in life, like lollipops and pizza and things like that, because they end up going to find Moonwind, his like actual human body, to try to help them restore them to their correct places in astral plane. And on the way, she's trying all this stuff, and she ends up finding joy in the simple things in life. Meanwhile, in the great beyond, an entity named Terry, who is this counter of souls, he ends up going on this mission to find Joe and restore balance, because he notices that the count is off, and he says, "We're missing a soul." So he ends up going on a mission to find Joe and bring him back where he belongs. And eventually, Terry is successful in getting both of them back. And when they both arrive back into this great before, 22 realizes that her badge has been fully filled out now, and it's turned into an Earth Pass. She ends up throwing her Earth Pass over to Joe after an argument with him, and then she goes and disappears into the zone. And Joe ends up learning that a spark isn't somebody's life purpose. It's just means that a soul is ready for life. Joe eventually ends up getting back into his body. He ends up performing with Dorothea, but this experience isn't as fulfilling as he initially expected. And he ends up deciding to give the Earth Pass back to 22, and in order to do so, he plays the piano and he enters into the zone. And during this whole scene, 22's internal dialogue is illustrated, and Joe ends up convincing her that she's ready to live and gives her this Earth Pass while he heads over to the Great Beyond. When Joe reaches the Great Beyond, he is stopped by Jerry, who ends up giving Joe a second chance at life, and Joe accepts and realizes that he needs to appreciate all of the little moments that life brings to him. Okay, so let's get into the spiritual aspects of the movie. Just a few quick notes is that the number 22 is a master number in numerology, and this means that it has an extraordinarily powerful vibration. So I think that's important to note. And also the fact that the entire movie is basically a near-death experience. As far as Jerry and Terry are concerned, Jerry is the universe, God, source. And when she says, I am the coming together of all quantized fields of the universe coming together in a form that the human brain can comprehend. I thought that was a very, very profound and memorable quote because it's true. The universe and the way the universe works is so vast and beyond what many people are capable of understanding. Jerry is portrayed as very cool, calm, collective, as opposed to Terry, who is angered and frustrated. He's, angry that the count is off, and he's just kind of like, he's like a nutsack, crazy, oh. And when Terry interacts with Jerry, it makes me come to the conclusion that Jerry is also illustrating in her character that, the fact that everything is always as it should be type of lesson. And I love it when she says, quiet coyote, quiet coyote. It's just so soothing. I just love it. And Terry also seems like he is portraying ego because of the way he gets flustered and he's very resistant. He's not go with the flow. He also asks for a trophy at the end of the movie for bringing Joe back. And maybe these two, this Jerry and Terry, also point towards the duality that is the universe, but they never actually explain what Terry is. He looks like Jerry, but we definitely know that he's not exactly the same as Jerry because of how she explains herself. She says the coming together of all the quantized fields, She said, but you can call us Jerry. And we do see scenes in the movie where the main Jerry is talking to other Jerrys, and she is addressing them as Jerry. So Terry and Jerry are two separate entities. In my interpretation, I would see Terry as kind of representing ego, but ego is a human thing, so I would say I would lean more towards the duality of the universe. On a second thought, I don't know if I would necessarily say that Jerry is source, but Jerry definitely just represents the universe. The zone area, this illustrates this trance state of being that people go to when they're doing something that they love to do, but it also illustrates this miserable, robotic, trance state of being that people get into when they're doing something that they don't like, when they don't have any joy in life, or when they're doing things that they enjoy to do, but they're doing it too much. Basically, all in all, the zone is illustrating escapism in the form of the lost souls that are in there as well. It illustrates the fact that if we get lost and lose ourselves in something that we love to do, or if it's something that we don't like to do, we become unconscious to ourselves. We lose our souls. We lose touch with our souls, and we become a lost soul. Basically, in lamest terms, we become unconscious. We become little robots and, just kind of running on, what is that when you do driving? Like autopilot, when you're running on autopilot. Acceptance is also a very, very major theme in the movie and lesson. Joe and 22 both start off in these states of rejection and resistance to the present moment. And Joe starts off, living in the future. And he's resistant to his current circumstance. He is this middle school teacher, but he has those big dreams. And the quote that I quoted from him when I was giving you guys the summary, when he says that he would be able to die a happy man once he gets to play with Dorothea Williams, it makes one come to the conclusion that he's not happy, but once he gets to play with her and her band, then he will find his happiness. So Joe starts, he's living in the future in the beginning, and he's resistant to his current circumstance, and eventually he ends up learning to be more present and accept that present moment when he ends up accepting his fate of death. I know he didn't actually die, and this death was short-lived, but when he goes back to the great before and he gives 22 her Earth Pass back, it shows his acceptance of his fate versus his resistance that he had shown earlier in this movie. Instead of reaching for a miscellaneous point in the future and being in a state of avoidance with his current reality, he starts to accept what life has to offer him, and he's no longer living in the future. Many of us, we live in the future and we live for that one moment that we always think is going to complete us and make us happy, but when we actually get to that point, it is sometimes not as good as we expected it to be. And once we achieve what that is, we start looking for the next best thing, and we get stuck into this cycle of I will be happy when, and then you get it, and then you go, I will be happy when, and you're constantly moving the goalposts on yourself as to what is going to bring you happiness and when that is going to come to you. Joe starts to realize that he needs to make himself happy in appreciating all of the moments in life, every single thing, the little things, and be more present. He goes from being in a state of resistance to a state of acceptance. This doesn't just happen with Joe, it also happens with 22. She was very resistant to her fate of having to go to Earth, and she goes from having that resistance to a state of accepting her fate of having to go to Earth. And another very memorable scene was when we find out why 22 may have been resistant to going to Earth. When Joe enters into the zone to give 22 her Earth Pass back, he finds 22 there, except she's a lost soul. And this scene illustrates that 22 didn't think she was good enough for living a life on Earth. She was thinking that she had no purpose. She was crying, and she was saying that she wasn't good enough, that she's selfish, she's not wise, she's the least remarkable soul, that she'll never find her spark. And there's other stuff that Joe had told her as well. It shows her internal dialogue. She was lost in an obsession of self-hate and negative self-talk. This scene was probably, like I said, the most profound, the most memorable scene the first time that I watched it. And I think this scene, to many, it might kind of go unnoticed. It illustrates how we treat ourselves sometimes, and not only how we treat ourselves, but how that gets reflected outwards. 22 is when she was resisting to going to Earth because she didn't feel good enough. In the beginning of the movie, we don't hear 22 say all of these negative things that she was actually saying to herself. So it shows us the lesson that when somebody is acting in a certain way, I apologize, we have to read between the lines and understand where it's coming from and the root of it, because 22 wasn't just being an ass. She wasn't just being mean for the sake of it. She was not treating herself very nicely, and that got projected outwards as a very cynical and kind of just a rough little unborn soul to deal with.
I also forgot to mention the relationship between Joe and his mom. Joe and his mom have a pretty good relationship, except for when it comes down to his career. She doesn't like the fact that Joe has hopes of being a musician, and this causes a bit of tension with their relationship. And it's a topic that Joe tries to avoid talking about with her. He hopes to avoid talking about it with his mom, but due to an unfortunate circumstance, Joe is forced to visit his mom when 22 is inside of Joe's body, and the subject is brought up, and he ends up having a discussion about it with his mom. But except since it's 22 inside of his body, and 22 is repeating what Joe as a cat is telling her to say, she's telling Joe's mom exactly verbatim what Joe is saying, which ends up exposing how Joe truly feels, his truth. And this scene ends up being a heart-to-heart conversation between Joe and his mom, and him telling his mom the truth and how he felt ended up releasing this tension in their relationship that they had, especially regarding this topic. And this illustrates the importance of telling our truth, exposing our true thought processes, because hiding them leads to conflict.
So there's more than just a live for the simple moments type of lesson in this movie. There is a lot more depth to it, and that's all that I have to say about that. If you guys have anything to add, feel free to leave me a comment. Otherwise, that's all that I have for you today. Again, and as always, I am a certified life, relationship, and spiritual coach. I do free 30-minute initial discovery sessions, but if you want to upgrade to a full session, you can do so for 50% off. I have a blog. All of that stuff is linked in the description. With that said, I will see you guys next time.